Welcome back, Screen Crush. I'm Ryan Arey. Let's talk about the post-credits scene of The Eternals featuring Dane Whitman, the future Black Knight. And we're going to talk about whose voice that is at the end. We've got a few theories. You're not going to want to miss this. Now, you might be a bit confused by this scene because Dane is barely in the movie. In fact, you could actually take him out of the movie and it wouldn't make much of a difference. Or, come to think of it, he could have played one of the human POV characters, but then that would have taken Kingo's valet out of the movie, and he was like my favorite character.
When we first met, he thought I was a vampire, and he tried to stake me through the heart.
I've apologized so many times.
Not quite.
So Dane's appearance in the movie was mostly there for setup, but to set up what? The clues are all in this scene, and it ties into Venom, Thor, Love and Thunder, and maybe Morbius the Living Vampire and Blade. It might even connect to the alternate realities that we see in What If and a time travel King Arthur story. So let's break this down, but first our Screen Crush trivia question. In Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which knight killed the Black Knight? Give me your answer down in the comments, and for the answer you can wait to the end or skip straight to this time code. Alright, so I'm going to explain the context for this scene, so when we go through it, all of this will make more sense. At Dane's birthday party, Circe told him that he should make amends with his uncle. In the comics, Dane's uncle was a criminal and an inventor called the Black Knight, who fought the Avengers. He even rode around on a genetically modified winged horse that had to have been confused all the time. The horse's name was Aragorn.
Son of Arathorn.
No relation. After Dane's uncle died, probably by falling off a flying horse, Dane found his Black Knight gear and decided to become a hero called the Black Knight. In the movie, Dane also mentions his weird family history, which I'll get into in a minute. So, in this scene, Dane is in his office trying to psych himself up. He keeps saying, "You can do this, you can do this."
You can do it!
Exactly. When he finally opens the case, we hear ominous sounds, whispering, like the ring wraiths or parcel tongue. Actually, the ring wraiths are a perfect metaphor for what's inside. I'll explain how in just a moment. Now, this case is covered in carvings of medieval knights. This is because Dane's ancestor was Sir Percival, who was one of King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. Now, this movie establishes that Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and Camelot were all real. When Athena tells Sprite that she's holding Excalibur, and Sprite replies with, "Oh, Arthur always had a crush on you." Dane's ancestor in the comics was named Percival, and in real life, the myth of Percival, over the generations through storytelling, morphed into Galahad. And Galahad is best known as the knight who is so pure that he actually found the Grail. I'm telling you this so you understand that according to legend, Dane's ancestor was pure of heart. As we'll see in a second, this was not actually the case. So all of this medieval history was foreshadowed when Circe gave Dane a ring with his family crest that dated back hundreds of years. The crest on that ring matched the carvings of the Knights Templar that we see on this case. So when Dane opens the case, he sees that Latin words have been carved into the lid, reading, "Death is my reward." Now, this is likely carved by one of Dane's ancestors because, as you probably guessed, the sword is actually cursed. So the sword has a long, very exciting history in the comics. It's called the Ebony Blade, and it was carved by Merlin from a starstone, basically a meteor. Merlin originally forged the sword for Sir Percy, who became the first Black Knight, and he told Sir Percy that the sword could only be properly used by someone who was pure of heart. But here's the thing. Merlin lied. What? The Ebony Blade could actually only be used by someone who was impure of heart. Like, it's the anti-Mjolnir. It's the counterpart to Excalibur. Excalibur's very good. The Ebony Blade is very evil. So the sword actually seeks out the evil inside someone and feeds off of it, amplifying it. It is a cursed blade, and like any cursed artifact, like the One Ring or drinking unicorn blood, it also extends long life to its users at a cost. Hence why one of Dane's ancestors carved "Death is my reward" into the case. The sword kept them alive so long that they actually longed for the sweet, sweet embrace of death.
Am I gonna die someday?
Now, in the comics, the Ebony Blade also has a connection to vampires and Dracula. For a while, Dane even teamed up with Blade the Vampire Hunter. Jon Snow and Blade, fighting vampires together. Will they be fighting the kind of hip clubbing vampires that we saw in Blade in the 90s? Or are they going to fight the old balding vampires like Nosferatu? Or are they going to fight a Nosferatu pretending to be a hip clubbing vampire in the 90s? Poor Nosferatu, an immortal being with no hair. Before he was turned into a vampire, someone really should have told him that the best way to prevent hair loss was to start when you still have hair left. And that is why I use Keeps, the sponsor of this video. There's actually a history of hair loss in my family, so when my hair started to thin, I didn't waste any time. So believe me, if your hair is starting to thin, do not put this off. Start using Keeps now. Treatments can take up to 4 to 6 months or more to see results, so it's important to act fast, and you have to start early and stick with it. The sooner you start using Keeps, the more hair you will save. It's even proven to work on a celestial scalp. Keeps has more 5-star reviews than any of its competitors, and hundreds of thousands of men trust Keeps for their hair loss prevention medication. So if you're noticing you're losing your hair, do something about it. For a limited time, go to keeps.com/screencrush or click the link in the description to get 50% off your first order. Now back to the ending explained. So the Ebony Blade is cursed. In fact, it's so cursed that for a while in the comics, Dane ditched it and used a lightsaber. Please do this, Marvel, please. So back to the voice. The first person I think it could be is the actual ghost of Sir Percy, or maybe the ghost of Merlin. This happens a lot in the comics. Dane will be visited by the ghost of Merlin or some other figure from Arthurian lore. Now, if they were planning to give the Black Knight his own solo movie, then I could see this being the case. But I doubt if they're going to give a solo movie to the Black Knight when they have the X-Men to start setting up. I think the key to this voice is the Ebony Blade itself. In the comics, they don't ever really explain where the Ebony Blade came from. It's just a meteor, kind of like the meteor that carried the Venom symbiote to Earth in Spider-Man 3. In fact, the Ebony Blade could give us some very interesting crossovers with the Venom movie or with Thor: Love and Thunder. So the villain of Thor: Love and Thunder is going to be this guy called Gorr the God Killer, played by Christian Bale. And I just have to say, if you have not read the Jason Aaron Thor series that Gorr debuted in, then you are really doing yourself a disservice. It's great. The guy wrote a 100-issue arc for Thor that is perfection. So, Gorr the God Killer was a regular peasant alien who prayed to the gods to save his crops and his family, but the gods didn't answer his prayers. So now he hates the gods, and he bonds with something called the Necro Sword, or the All Black. This thing made him extremely powerful, so he starts rampaging through realms, killing gods like Thor. It later turned out that this All Black Sword was a god itself, the god of the symbiotes. That's right, the symbiotes like Venom.
Like a bird in the wind.
And we also see the Ebony Blade kind of shift and move around like a symbiote. Even though Marvel Studios doesn't have the rights to make Venom movies, they could have made a deal with Sony to include the symbiote in this universe. In our Venom 2 Ending Explained video, I talked about how there are symbiotes spread across the universe, maybe including the multiverse. So even though Venom has now crossed over into a new universe, the MCU, there are probably already symbiotes in the MCU just on some distant planet. And this interconnected hive mind between universes is what brought Eddie and Venom to the main MCU. In fact, the Ebony Blade could tie back to the creation of the symbiotes. So in the comics, there's this villain called Null. His deal is that he was born in darkness and he loves darkness, so he's exactly like Malekith in the MCU. He actually created the symbiotes to spread darkness across the universe. And he created the All Black, the sword that Gorr uses. And later, he tried to take the Ebony Blade for himself because it's just that powerful. So I'm telling you all this because in the comics, Null's area of perfect darkness is interrupted by the Celestials when they interfere by entering his perfect dark area. So he goes to war with them and uses the All Black sword to cut off a Celestial's head. This could be the decapitated Celestial that is nowhere in Guardians of the Galaxy. So just imagine, if the Ebony Blade was created from that same darkness, the material that can cut off a Celestial's head. If there is an Eternals 2, then Dane could be the key to rescuing Circe. I think this is why he goes to open the case to begin with. He says, "I'm sorry, I have to try," because he thinks that he can use the Blade's power to bring her back. So when we try to figure out whose voice is at the end of this, we have to ask ourselves, what's the next movie Dane is going to appear in? I have 3 possibilities. 1, Thor: Love and Thunder. This could be the voice of Gorr the God Killer, or maybe an Asgardian. But, I doubt it. That movie already has a pretty crowded cast. I listened to this voice about 100 times, and to me, it sounds a lot like 2 people. The first is Jeffrey Wright, aka Uatu the Watcher.
What the hell is this?
So in case you haven't seen it, the show What If is a series of vignettes about alternate realities narrated by this cosmic being called the Watcher, but the Watcher has sworn to never interfere in events.
I see you.
Until he accidentally interferes, and then he has to interfere to undo his interference. So why would the Watcher be interfering here? There's a couple possibilities. In the comics, one of Dane's arch-enemies is a villain called Proctor. Proctor made Circe start to lose her mind, like what happened to Athena in this movie. Eventually, she does a mind meld with Dane that stabilizes her mind and also gives him the powers of an Eternal.
But that's not important right now.
But what is important is that Proctor is actually a variant of Dane Whitman from another reality. So if a variant of Dane is slipping around the multiverse causing problems, then the Watcher might interfere, especially if he caused Proctor to escape his reality, which was the case with Ultron. And there's another possibility. For a while, Dane spent time in the body of his ancestor, Eobard Garrington, in the 13th century. So this would mean traveling through time and altering the timeline, which, as we learned in Endgame and Loki, creates a branching reality and a new universe. The Watcher could interfere here if creating this universe jeopardizes the others. But again, which upcoming movie would this happen in? I'm just not seeing the adventures of Dane Whitman in the 13th century headline in a movie, maybe in a Disney Plus show. Or this could just be set up for the next Avengers movie or a live-action Guardians of the Multiverse, where we'll see Dane's origin play out in a big team-up movie. Even though it sounds like Jeffrey Wright, I doubt if that's who the voice is. That's why I think that this voice is none other than Mahershala Ali's Blade the Vampire Hunter. The movie doesn't have a release date yet, but we know it's coming, and it's going to bring mysticism and vampires into the MCU, and vampires were already teased in this movie.
When we first met, he thought I was a vampire, and he tried to stake me through the heart.
So there was a period in the comics where Dane joined a group called M13, a group of British heroes who fight evil supernatural beings. This is when he discovered that he didn't have the real Ebony Blade, but a fake blade that was forged by Dracula. The Dracula.
Well, if it isn't my good friends, the
Simpson family, Master.
Simpson, eh?
So what if the MCU decides to simplify this and say that the Ebony Blade was made by Merlin, who was also a vampire, or that it has been a vampiric tool used for centuries, stealing the life force of its users, like an energy vampire?
When it comes to zoning ordinances, I have a few thoughts.
So this sword, like the One Ring, could be imbued with all of Dracula's power. Dane's ancestors have been using it for centuries to keep it away from the vampires at the cost of their own souls. So Blade, who's out there trying to kill vampires and track down Dracula, is looking for this sword. He finds it, and Dane Whitman, and he's going to tell him all about the sword, and we'll see his origins as the Black Knight in the Blade movie. In the comics, Dane used the sword to fight an army of vampires, which we could see him doing alongside Blade in his solo film. But even then, I'm not sure we'll see the origins of two heroes in one movie. Seems like a lot to just pack into Blade. And now the answer to our Screen Crush trivia question. In Monty Python's Quest for the Holy Grail, which knight killed the Black Knight? Actually, none of them did.
Running away, eh? You yellow bastard!
King Arthur left him legless and armless. So let me know your theories about the voice in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And guys, if it is your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Arey.